Juliet, welcome to the Maxim Institute podcast. Today we're talking about your research and the role of religious charities in New Zealand and possible changes to charity tax law. So to give people a sense of who you are and what your interests are, can you tell us a bit about your work and how you became interested in charity law?
Sure. Thank you so much, Thomas, for having me here today. It's an absolute honour to talk to you. So I started on my research 15 years ago, thereabouts, and I just kind of fell into charity law completely by chance. And I realised how fascinating it was. So I just carried on, and now it's my specialist area. But within charity law sits religious charities. So advancement of religion is one of the legal charitable purposes recognised in New Zealand and Australia and the UK, Canada, etc. So religious charities were not my initial focus, not least because I probably need to put it out there. I'm atheist, so they have zero interest for me whatsoever. So I just focused on charities generally. But as I began to explore charity law world, I began to realise that actually advancement of religion, so religious charities, were utterly fascinating and were drawing me in an awful lot more than I anticipated. And so I was quite a conflicted person, I have to say. So when I began to think about doing my PhD, I knew it was going to be on charity law. And I ended up, it was going to be in one area, and then I was like, no, I need to look at religious charities. I need to think about whether or not we can justify them in this world, in this day and age, where as far as I'm concerned, and many atheists are concerned, they are irrelevant and probably shouldn't really have an existence anymore, because who would need a church or a religious charity after all? Anyway, so it turns out that my hypothesis was fundamentally wrong. So my PhD was, I justified religious charities throughout my PhD from a legal perspective, from a socio-legal perspective, from an economic perspective. And one of my chapters, so I was recommended strongly by my senior chief supervisor at the time, Sir Grant Hammond. And you didn't ignore what Sir Grant Hammond strongly recommended. And he recommended that I look very carefully at what would happen if religious charities were removed from the charity sector. And I was like, okay, I can do that. And actually, it turns out that it's really hard to research that area because it's not been done before, or there's very little research out there. So I began exploring a number of different countries to see what they'd looked at with regard to this. And the US had done some work in 2016, and it was utterly fascinating. A chap called Brian Grimm with his daughter Melissa. And they had looked at the economics of religious charities. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, let's have a look at this. And I was blown away by how much religious charities were worth to the US economy, just in 2016 alone. So they were worth 1.2 trillion US dollars just in 1 year alone. That was more at the time than Google, Apple, and a number of oil and gas companies. So I was like, well, US is very different from New Zealand. It's a very religious country. It's got to be different elsewhere. Brian did the same in Canada in 2018. He looked at how much religious charities are worth. And Canada is very much, would be considered like a post-religious country, so very secular in many ways. Their religious charities were worth 67 billion Canadian dollars, much smaller population. I was like, Australia did the same, and came out with billions of dollars. So I was like, okay, New Zealand, what's been done here? Nothing. We had no idea what religious charities were worth. So I decided that at that point, I needed to find out. So I then needed assistance to do this because I do law, not maths. And I called in to assist me on the project. So somebody that I'm working very closely with, Professor Frank Scrimgeour from the Waikato Management School, University of Waikato, who is fabulous at finance and economics. So we began this journey on looking at how much religious charities were worth, because my view was that we were going to be very different from the US and Canada and Australia. New Zealand sits on its own with its own laws, its own culture, its own ethos. And I was thinking, nah, probably religious charities not going to be worth that much, to be fair. Well, turns out that my hypothesis is wrong yet again, which is quite disturbing for me as an atheist. But anyway, so Frank and I have only just really scratched the surface of what this is all about. It's complex, detailed research. But so far, what has been revealed is that New Zealand's religious charities are worth, just in 2018 alone, 6.1 billion New Zealand dollars worth to the economy, which is just astonishing considering what a tiny population we have, that we are considered to be a secular state, that there are huge growing numbers of atheists, agnostics, people who no longer want to follow what we call our traditional religions and going down the more spiritual route. So this absolutely blew my mind. I was like, why? Why is this the case? What are we doing for these figures to exist? So I've been on quite a journey with many churches, many religious entities for the last couple of 3 years, traveling around the country, getting them to answer questionnaires for me to understand exactly what it is they do. And what they do is generally hidden from the public gaze. Not because they're doing anything nefarious, but because what they do is hidden away, because that's what religious people do. There's this, what's that saying? That the kumara doesn't speak of its own sweetness. Well, that's exactly what religious people seem to do. They go, we've done some good stuff, but no one needs to know about it. Yes, we do.
So thanks for that. So just to draw out what you're talking about here, you mentioned the value of religious charities to the New Zealand economy. You're not talking about the sort of asset value or cash value of the churches. You're attempting to measure the kind of value of their activities, right?
Correct. Yes. So we have included things like volunteers, employment, some of the services that they carry out. But what that has missed actually is a whole range of things that we've not yet put a dollar figure on. So things like their high levels of tax compliance that they must comply with, improved health, lower rates of divorce, lower rates of individuals being incarcerated, higher levels of employment, higher levels of education, less likely to become unemployed, to require benefits from the government. All of these do have dollar figures. Absolutely, they do. We've just yet to get there with regards to that, but it will happen. And I think this absolutely needs to be spoken about, because there are huge pressures on religious charities, and certainly have been for the last few years. And my concern is that people are not hearing the full story about what religious charities do. And look, I absolutely recognise the irony of an atheist, and this white atheist colonist telling people in New Zealand that they need to concentrate on religious charities and to understand exactly what they do. And look, what can I say? I'm a conflicted woman, but I do think that their story needs telling, and apparently I'm doing it right now. So
there are some noises currently that the government is proposing some changes to charity law and including more things in tax. Are you able to give us a brief description about what some of those proposals are?
Yeah, so a couple of 3 years ago, charity law was changed anyway, but it didn't do it. Many of us were requesting the government to look at charitable purposes, i.e. what can be charitable. So things like, so we currently have what are called the 4 heads of charity, which are legally acknowledged charitable purposes. So you've got relief of poverty, advancement of education, advancement of religion, which is the one that I've been focusing on so much, and the 4th one, which is any other purposes beneficial to the community. So those were not looked at by the government, and neither was the other thing is the legal doctrine of public benefit, which every charity has to demonstrate in order to ensure that they are registered as charity and then retain that charity status. Now, some of the changes that occurred through the government a couple of 3 years ago was introducing a different appeal system, which was very beneficial, looking at different accountancy administration of those. So things that would have impacted on charities, absolutely. But the key thing that to which you're referring is the possibility of tax changes for charities. Now, there's a consultation paper that has been out there for a couple of 3 weeks that I strongly urge people to go and look at. It's easy to find. Just Google consultation paper IRD charities. It will be there. You can go and read it all. You might need a glass of wine, obviously, to do that, but obviously go and have a read of it. And currently, at the moment, New Zealand charities, of which there are nigh on 30,000 odd, which is a huge amount, considering how small we are as a country. Any business activities that are undertaken, also income-derived charity business activities are tax exempt. So if a charity has a business arm, then that will be exempt. They will be exempt from paying income tax on the business arm. And there are other tax exemptions that charities do, but this is not a legal loophole. This is not people getting in through the back door and going, oh, yes, we're earning heaps of money from not paying these taxes. No, this is recognition of the phenomenal work that charities undertake, a lot of which goes unspoken about, not just religious charities, so many charities people have no clue about.
So a concrete example of these, I guess, business arms of charities, are you talking about things like the hospice running a charity shop that is a business
absolutely.
that makes money?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's an incredibly sensible thing to do, because in this day and age, nobody's got any money. We went through a crisis of COVID. And since then, our country's still been in pretty much a financial crisis. And so many people are homeless, without food, all of these terrible things. And let's take a church that has a cafe, right? And I say, what a brilliant idea, have a cafe, because how do churches really get money? Well, it may well be that their congregation might give them $5. And how big is their congregation? Well, for some of these churches, their congregations are not very big. So there might be $100 raised. Well, how is that going to pay for a roof for a church? How is that going to pay to ensure that they are earthquake compliant? How is that going to pay their water bill? It's not. So to be very sensible, these churches have gone, we need something that will bring in money. 100%, that's a brilliant idea. You have a cafe. Some churches have that. And what that does is it integrates those churches into communities. People go, oh, I didn't know this existed before. What a beautiful building. Look at its history. Look at its value to our community. And you have people going, what a great idea. Lovely cup of coffee, nice sticky bun, everybody's happy, and it raises a bit of revenue. But we need to be careful with this, because for some reason the public has it in their view that all of this money that they're grabbing from their so-called cafe is going to be paying top dollar to all these directors or whatever of the church. No, charity law requires all of that money that you are making from your cafe to go back in to feed your charitable purposes. So nobody can make a private pecuniary benefit as a result of this cafe. Do you know what I mean? So when people are demanding that charities be much more stringently governed, well, we've already got charity law that does exactly that. If anyone wants to go and have a look at the accounts of charities, they can. They are all publicly available. And hardly anyone does, because what they'll find when they do that is actually it's all very transparent. And charities are subject to far greater scrutiny than any for-profit company. And anyway, sorry, yeah.
So in your mind then, this proposal to, or discussion paper to tax the business arms of charitable organizations is based on a false understanding of how charities work and the benefits they provide. I guess a closing question for you then is, if you have your elevator pitch to a decision maker on charity law, what do you tell them? What would you like them to know?
Yeah, I would like them actually to find out exactly what would happen, what would be the repercussion if those charities then have to pay tax, income tax on business. And because I can tell you that the government is not going to know exactly how much charities are worth, and particularly religious charities, and then what would be the consequences. I can tell them from the work that we've done so far that literally just scratches the surface. Likely they would lose immediately 6.1 billion New Zealand dollars. Is the government going to step in and replace that money? No, of course they're not. They would never do that. They'd never be able to. So that charity would have to go, okay, well, I now have to pay tax on this. Well, the money that was going to support those people in that hospice, we can't do that anymore. We can't provide that financial literacy that we were providing for those people because we've got to pay that tax bill now. We've got to comply with the law. So I would argue that actually there needs to be some significant number crunching done by people who really understand charity law, the charity sector, and finances.
Thank you very much, Juliet. A good reminder that policy interventions can always have unintended consequences. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today.
You're most welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
That was an interview with Dr Juliet Chevalier-Watts, Associate Professor of Law at Waikato University. For more on this, check out her column on Substack or read it on the Maxim Institute website.